The patient who never left. Hospitals are places of healing, sanctuaries where pain meets care and life is meant to be preserved. But sometimes, behind the sterile walls and quiet corridors, darker stories unfold. Stories of fear, negligence, and silence. In 2017, at one of Nigeria's largest hospitals, Lagos University Teaching Hospital, known as LUTH, a patient walked in for treatment and was never seen again. No one saw him leave. No one could explain where he went. And no one, not even the hospital itself, would ever provide answers. This is the story of Mr. Adewale Ogunlai, the man who vanished inside a hospital ward and whose disappearance exposed something deeply unsettling about the institutions we trust with our lives. A story of mystery, a story of silence, a story of the patient who never left. In early 2017, Lagos University Teaching Hospital, known simply as LUTH, was its usual hive of activity. Located in Idi-Araba, Surulere, the hospital is one of Nigeria's busiest, receiving hundreds of patients daily. From emergencies to long-term treatments, it serves as a lifeline for thousands. That year, a man named Mr. Adewale Ogunlai walked through its gates seeking medical help. According to family members, he had been feeling unwell for several days, a persistent fever, dizziness, and fatigue. He was 54 years old, a retired civil servant, father of 3, known by neighbors as a quiet, decent man. On the morning of March 22, 2017, Adewale was admitted into the male medical ward 2, located on the hospital's 3rd floor. His wife, Mrs. Funk Ogunlai, stayed beside him for most of the first day, helping him settle in. The doctors diagnosed him with a mild respiratory infection and prescribed intravenous antibiotics. His condition wasn't life-threatening. He was expected to be discharged within a few days. But from the moment he arrived, small details began to feel strange. A nurse, who later spoke on condition of anonymity, recalled that the patient's file was missing its admission number for nearly 3 hours, something unusual in a hospital known for strict records. Another staff member remembered that Adewale complained about a male orderly who kept staring at him that first night. By the second day, he seemed to be improving. He even spoke with his younger brother on the phone, assuring him, "I'll be home soon." No one could have guessed those would be among his last known words. On the night of March 24th, the ward lights flickered due to a power fluctuation, common at LUTH, but that night, it lasted longer than usual. When the lights came back, one patient was gone. Mr. Adewale's bed was empty. His 4-drip had been detached. His sandals, phone, and hospital gown were still there, but the man himself had vanished. At first, the nurses thought he had gone to the restroom. When he didn't return after 30 minutes, a search began. By dawn, the hospital security had been alerted, but by then, the trail was already cold. No one had seen him leave. No CCTV footage captured him walking out. No security guard remembered checking him at the gate. By the time his family arrived in the morning, panic had already spread across the ward. A patient had disappeared from inside one of Nigeria's largest hospitals, and no one could explain how. The vanishing. By the early hours of March 25, 2017, confusion had settled over the male ward at Lagos University Teaching Hospital. The nurses on duty were whispering among themselves, checking rooms, and making quiet phone calls. A patient had disappeared, and no one could explain how. The nurse in charge, Sister Uche, conducted the first informal head count. Every bed was filled except one, bed 14, belonging to Mr. Adewale Ogunlai. His 4-line was still in place on the stand, but the fluid bag had drained dry. His hospital gown was folded at the foot of the bed, and his slippers were on the floor. The sheets were slightly crumpled, as if someone had just risen and left. The time of disappearance was estimated to be between 1:30 a.m. and 2 a.m. The night was unusually quiet. The usual hum of generators had died down for maintenance, and security patrols were thinner than normal. When hospital security was called, they began checking every restroom, corridor, and nearby ward. The CCTV system, installed only a few months earlier, should have provided answers. But when the recordings from that night were reviewed, something disturbing emerged. Between 1:20 a.m. and 2:15 a.m., the cameras covering the male medical ward corridor went completely dark. The footage resumed afterward, but with a 30-minute gap. When technicians were called to verify the error, they claimed there had been a power surge that caused temporary data corruption. Yet other cameras in nearby wards worked perfectly fine during that same hour. It was as though the system had been deliberately interrupted. By morning, word spread quickly among staff. Doctors whispered about it in the cafeteria. Nurses avoided questions. The hospital's chief medical director, when reached by the family later that day, told them, "We are investigating." He probably walked out during confusion. But those who knew Adewale rejected that idea immediately. He was weak, receiving intravenous antibiotics, and had no money or phone with him. How could a man in that state simply walk out of a hospital complex surrounded by guards, gates, and checkpoints? That afternoon, his family arrived. His wife, Funk, broke down as she searched every ward herself. They checked the restrooms, the emergency section, even a mortuary. No trace. By evening, a missing persons report was filed with the Mushin Police Division. Officers visited the hospital briefly, asked routine questions, and left. According to hospital protocol, any disappearance within the facility should trigger an internal review. But this time there was none. Days passed. The bed where Adewale had slept was reassigned to another patient within 72 hours, a move that shocked his relatives. When the family asked for his medical file, they were told it had been taken upstairs for auditing. They never saw it again. Rumors began to circulate among hospital staff. One nurse claimed she saw two men in white coats wheeling a covered stretcher out of the ward at around 2 a.m. Another staff member swore she heard a disturbance near the back exit around that same time. But without CCTV evidence, nothing could be proven. When journalists attempted to follow up the story a week later, hospital authorities issued a short statement. The management of Lagos University Teaching Hospital is aware of an incident involving a missing patient. Investigations are ongoing, and details will be made public once concluded. No update ever came. By the end of April 2017, 1 month after his disappearance, the hospital had resumed normal operations as if nothing had happened. But for the Ogunlai family, life had stopped. They still came to the hospital gates every morning, hoping for any word, a clue, a call, a confession. None came. The search. For the Ogunlai family, the days following March 25, 2017, became a blur of fear, confusion, and unanswered questions. The man who had gone to the hospital for a mild infection was gone, and the institution responsible for his safety had fallen silent. At first, the family believed it was a simple mistake. Maybe he had wandered off in confusion or been transferred to another ward without proper documentation. Lagos University Teaching Hospital is vast, with over a dozen departments, multiple annexes, and hundreds of patients admitted daily. People get moved, records mix up. It happens. But as the hours turned into days, it became clear this was not a case of poor coordination. Something darker was at play. On March 26th, Adewale's younger brother, Kunal, began a room-by-room search of the hospital, accompanied by two friends. They carried a photo of him, an old passport picture showing a calm man with glasses and a faint smile. They showed it to nurses, cleaners, and security guards. Some shook their heads. Others hesitated before replying. One janitor, a woman who had been cleaning the ward corridors that night, told them quietly, "I saw something strange around 2 a.m. Two men pushing a stretcher, but it was covered completely. They were not from that ward. I don't know who they were." When I asked if she reported it, she shook her head. "Who will listen? I need my job." The family moved next to the hospital morgue, a cold, dimly lit building behind the emergency complex. Morgue attendants checked their books. No record of a man named Adewale. They allowed the family to check the bodies manually, just to be sure. None matched. Next came nearby clinics, private hospitals, roadside medical centers, even the Lagos State University Teaching Hospital in Ikeja. Every search ended the same way. No admission record, no unidentified patient, no body. On March 29th, the family took the case to the police formally. The investigating officer assigned, Inspector Daniel, began routine questioning at LUTH. His report, later leaked to a journalist, described uncooperative hospital staff and missing internal logs. When he requested CCTV footage, he was told it was under maintenance review. The family's frustration grew. They began to suspect that the hospital was hiding something. By early April, local media outlets caught wind of the story. A short article appeared in the Nation newspaper titled, "Family Cries Out as Patient Disappears from Lagos Hospital." It sparked brief public outrage. For a few days, talk shows mentioned it. People demanded answers. But then, silence. No follow-up. The story vanished as quickly as the man himself. Mrs. Ogunleye kept visiting the hospital daily, sitting near the main entrance, holding her husband's photo. She refused to believe he was dead. In one interview, she said softly, "If he had died, I would have accepted, but I cannot bury a ghost. I need to know what they did to him." One night, around 3 weeks after the disappearance, the family received a strange phone call. A man's voice, low and urgent, told them not to return to the hospital. "You won't find him. People disappear here and nobody talks," he said before hanging up. The number could not be traced. It was around this time that whispers began to spread about organ trafficking, an unspoken fear that had long lingered in the background of Nigerian hospitals. Some staff members hinted that certain patients, particularly those without strong connections, had vanished in previous years under suspicious circumstances. But whenever the family pressed for details, doors closed. The hospital stopped taking their calls. The security department told them to let the police handle it. The police, in turn, said they were waiting for hospital updates. Weeks turned into months. By June 2017, the case had grown cold. Still, the family refused to give up. They printed missing posters with Adewale's photograph, placed them around Surulere, Mushin, and Yaba. They visited churches, hospitals, and traditional healers, searching for hope, for answers, for closure. But each lead brought more frustration. Some claimed he had been taken spiritually. Others suggested he had been kidnapped for rituals. None of these could be proven. By August, 5 months after the disappearance, the family was left with nothing but rumors, dead ends, and silence. The hospital never issued a public apology. The police never made an arrest. And the name Adewale Ogunleye slowly faded from public memory. But inside the walls of LUTH, whispers continued. Staff avoided the topic in public, but in private, some said the truth was far more disturbing than anyone outside could imagine. The theories. By late 2017, months after the mysterious disappearance of Mr. Adewale Ogunleye, 3 main theories had emerged, whispered by insiders, repeated in markets, and debated quietly among Lagos residents who still remembered the case. Each theory tried to answer the same question. How does a living man vanish inside a government hospital, without a trace, without record, and without accountability? 1. The organ trafficking theory. The first and most terrifying theory was that Adewale was a victim of organ harvesting, a dark trade that thrives in the shadows of medical institutions. Nigeria, like many countries, has long battled rumors and occasional arrests linked to illegal organ trafficking. In some cases, desperate individuals sell kidneys or livers to private buyers. But darker versions of the trade involve patients who never consent, patients who never wake up. According to one anonymous hospital technician, who later spoke to an independent blogger, some people get admitted and never leave. Their files vanish. Their names are removed from the registry. The claim was impossible to verify, but it resonated with the circumstances of Adewale's case. His medical file disappeared. CCTV footage was missing during the key hour. Security logs were altered for that night. Every detail seemed to point toward deliberate erasure. If the theory was true, then Adewale might not have walked out of the hospital at all. He might have been moved intentionally, under the cover of night, through one of the service corridors that connect loose wards to its morgue and surgery theaters. A few nurses quietly suggested that organs from certain patients were being smuggled out for illegal transplants, possibly sold to private clinics or even sent abroad. But there was no proof, and no one dared to investigate further. 2. the medical negligence theory. The second theory was less sinister, but equally damning. Hospital negligence and a cover-up to protect the institution's image. According to this version, Adewale might have suffered a medical emergency during the night, perhaps cardiac arrest or a severe reaction to his medication. If the night staff failed to notice or respond on time, the hospital could face accusations of malpractice. Rather than report the incident officially, someone might have chosen to conceal it. In this version, his body could have been transferred to the morgue under an unidentified patient tag and later disposed of without identification to avoid scandal. The evidence supporting this theory came from inconsistencies in internal hospital records. When a family requested copies of the night duty logs, the section between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. was blank. The explanation given was incomplete documentation. One of Adewale's roommates in the ward told reporters he was coughing badly that night. I called the nurse, but she said she'd come later. After that, I fell asleep. In the morning, his bed was empty. If that was true, negligence, followed by a hasty cover-up, could explain the missing patient. But again, the hospital never confirmed or denied it. 3. The internal corruption and cover-up theory. The third theory pointed to systemic corruption within the hospital itself, a web of bribery, file manipulation, and institutional decay that allowed disappearances like this to be quietly buried. LUTH, like many public hospitals, has multiple overlapping departments: security, administration, records, and war management. Each can blame the other when something goes wrong. In this theory, Adewale's disappearance wasn't a planned crime, but rather an accident that the hospital chose to bury because accountability costs careers. A former employee, speaking anonymously years later, claimed that certain incidents were deliberately classified as resolved in the hospital database to prevent audits. If you make trouble, you lose your job, she said. People learn to keep quiet. The family's interactions with hospital authorities fit this pattern perfectly. They were given half answers, redirected between offices, and promised updates that never came. By the time they realized they were being stalled, too much time had passed. Evidence, if any, was gone. Theories beyond logic. Beyond these three main possibilities, Lagos rumor mill offered countless others: ritual abduction, spiritual manipulation, or even human disappearance linked to supernatural causes. Some locals, steeped in traditional beliefs, insisted the man was taken, not killed, but trapped between the physical and spiritual world. A few even reported seeing a figure resembling him near the hospital grounds months later, wandering silently at night. Of course, such accounts are impossible to confirm, but in a society where the lines between science and the supernatural often blur, these whispers only deepen the mystery. By the end of 2017, the case had been reduced to fragments. No body, no footage, no investigation. Only theories remained. And behind each theory, one haunting truth. A man entered a hospital for treatment and never came out again. The silence. By early 2018, nearly a year had passed since Mr. Adewale Ogunleye vanished from the Lagos University teaching hospital. No new information had emerged. No arrests. No admissions. The case had dissolved into silence. But it wasn't just the silence of an unsolved mystery. It was the deliberate quiet of an institution protecting itself. The vanishing of evidence. When Adewale's family pressed for updates, they were told that the internal investigation had been concluded, yet no report was ever made public. In June 2018, the family's lawyer filed a formal request under the Freedom of Information Act, seeking the hospital's official findings. The hospital responded 6 weeks later with a single sentence: "There are no available documents on the incident in question." That response stunned the family. It meant that either the investigation had never happened or the records have been destroyed. A hospital as large as LUTH keeps extensive logs. Every medication, every patient movement, every security report. For an entire case to vanish, someone had to intentionally erase it. A former records clerk, who later left Nigeria for Ghana, described the internal pressure she felt during those months. They told us not to discuss it. They said it was a sensitive matter that could affect the hospital's reputation. Files were moved upstairs, then disappeared. She paused before adding, "We all knew something went wrong that night." The fear within. Inside LUTH, not everyone was silent out of loyalty. Many were silent out of fear. One junior nurse who had worked in the ward during the period of the disappearance was later transferred unexpectedly to another department. Another staff member who tried to speak to a journalist received a disciplinary query for violating confidentiality. The message was clear: keep quiet or lose your job. Some insiders said there were higher authorities involved, possibly administrators or security supervisors who decided that admitting failure would harm the hospital's public image and jeopardize funding. So, the incident was quietly buried. No press briefings, no official closure for the family, no acknowledgement that a man once lay in bed 14 under hospital care and never walked out alive. The public's short memory. In Lagos, new tragedies happen every day: accidents, fires, crimes. The public attention shifts quickly. Within months, Adewale's case was forgotten by the media. Only a few online bloggers continued to mention it occasionally, usually in conspiracy threads about Nigerian hospital disappearances or organ trafficking. But without evidence, their stories faded into the noise. Still, the family refused to let go. Mrs. Funk Ogunlai kept a file of everything: newspaper cuttings, police statements, printed photos of the hospital, and names of every staff member she spoke to. She once told a reporter, "They want me to forget, but I cannot. Until I see my husband, dead or alive, I will not stop." Her persistence earned sympathy from human rights activists, but not enough attention to reopen the case. The system had moved on. A culture of silence. The disappearance of a patient in a Nigerian hospital should have sparked outrage, reforms, and investigations. Instead, it became one more story buried under bureaucracy. The culture of silence runs deep. In many public institutions, staff fear exposure more than wrongdoing. Whistleblowers are labeled troublemakers. Internal problems are covered, not corrected. A doctor once summarized it bluntly: hospitals in Nigeria are not just places of healing. They're systems built to protect themselves first. Inside such a system, truth becomes dangerous. So, the silence around Adewale's disappearance wasn't just neglect, it was protection. Protection for the institution, the management, and perhaps the people who knew what really happened. By the second anniversary in March 2019, the Ogunlai family held a quiet vigil near the hospital gates. They lit candles, placed flowers by the wall, and prayed. Passers-by watched curiously, unaware of the story behind the flickering lights. One of Adewale's sons, now in university, stood holding a photograph of his father and whispered, "They think silence buries truth. But truth doesn't die. It only waits." The legacy. Time has a way of erasing pain, or at least burying it beneath layers of new headlines and fresh tragedies. But for the family of Mr. Adewale Ogunlai, time only deepened the wound. Years after his disappearance, his story remains one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries in Nigeria's medical history. A man who entered a hospital for healing and was never seen again. A case that refused to die. By 2020, whispers about hospital disappearances began surfacing in other parts of the country. Families from Ibadan, Enugu, and Abuja shared eerily similar stories. Relatives admitted for minor treatments, only to vanish without trace. In many of these cases, the explanation sounded familiar. "We have no record of that name. The patient discharged himself. The CCTV wasn't working that night." Each time, the pattern repeated. Files went missing. Reports were inconclusive. Investigations ended quietly. A few independent journalists began linking these cases together, referring to them as the hospital disappearance pattern. They argued that the system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed, to hide its failures, not expose them. The case of Adewale Ogunlai became their reference point, the earliest and most public example of how easily a life could vanish inside an institution meant to preserve it. A warning to every family. In Nigeria, it's common for families to camp inside hospitals when a loved one is admitted. They sleep on benches, eat by the corridors, and watch every movement. Some call it hospital vigilance. Before 2017, people thought it was just cultural, a show of family care. After Adewale's disappearance, it became a form of self-protection. People no longer trusted that the system alone could safeguard their relatives. Mothers watched over their sick children like hawks. Siblings took turns staying overnight. Every visitor made sure their patient was never left unattended. The phrase, "don't leave them alone" in the hospital became a quiet warning, one learned through tragedy. The echoes inside LUTH. Within LUTH itself, the memory of Adewale's disappearance remains a ghost story whispered by new staff. Students in medical rotations still ask, "Is it true someone disappeared here?" Older nurses shake their heads and reply softly, "Don't talk about that. Just do your work." Some say his spirit still roams the halls at night, especially near Ward 2, where his bed once stood. Others dismiss it as superstition, a way for people to make sense of something senseless. But those who worked there in 2017 know the truth. Whether ghost or cover-up, something happened that night, and the hospital will never speak of it. A broader truth. The disappearance of one man exposed something far larger. The fragility of truth in a system where power, fear, and silence intertwine. In many Nigerian institutions, from hospitals to police stations, accountability fades in the shadows. Records vanish. Evidence gets lost. Stories die quietly. The case of the patient who never left became a symbol, not just of one man's mystery, but of the countless stories that go unreported, unseen, and unresolved. The family's last hope. In 2022, 5 years after the incident, Adewale's wife filed a petition with the National Human Rights Commission, demanding that LUTH be held accountable. The case is still pending. She now lives quietly with her children, still keeping her husband's photograph on the wall. Every March 25th, she lights a candle at home and prays, not for revenge, but for truth. In one interview, she said, "I only want to know where he is. Even if he's gone, let me bury him properly. Let me have peace." But peace has not come. 8 years have passed since that night. New doctors have replaced the old. New patients have come and gone. Yet one mystery remains unsolved. One question still echoes through the wards of Lagos University Teaching Hospital. What happened to the patient who never left? Some say he died quietly, a victim of human error. Others believe he was taken by greed, by corruption, or by something even darker. But whatever the truth is, it lies buried somewhere inside those hospital walls, sealed by silence and time. Until someone breaks that silence, the story of Mr. Adewale Ogunlayi will remain a chilling reminder that even in places meant to save lives, shadows can still swallow them whole. Years later, the questions remain. What really happened that night inside LUTH? Was it human error, corruption, or was something far darker? The truth may never be known. The files are gone. The witnesses are silent. The system has moved on. But for one family, time has stood still. A wife still waits for her husband's return. Children still hope for a truth that may never come. And somewhere in the corridors of Lagos University Teaching Hospital, Bed 14, the bed where he once lay, remains a symbol of unanswered questions and unspoken fears. Because in that building, one man's story was erased, and all that's left is the haunting reminder of the patient who never left.